We locked ourselves in the office over a weekend and essentially had a hackathon and built the COVID symptom study app.
Welcome to Aha Moments podcast with me, Kobi, Omenaka.
And we'd essentially give them Coca-Cola to have at their parties.
My guest this week is Sara Kathleen Gordon. Sara is one of the GM's, general managers at Zoe. But I've known Sara for a while now, especially based on amazing work that Zoe did at the start of the pandemic, which governments around the world picked up upon.
Someone will say, don't eat this pasta, eat this one. Don't follow this diet, follow this one. This is rubbish. This is the way forward. And so you really wind up with lots of very confused people.
I initially brought on Sara to talk about marketing in the broader sense, but we ended up going quite deep into nutrition, and that's just great. I just really love seeing where these conversations go, and this really is an important conversation, and I think it's really valuable information that Sara shares with us, and we have a good back and forth about. Hey Sara, thank you so much for joining me on our Aha Moments podcast. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here and feeling super refreshed. I've just come back from a week away with the team from Zoe. We were at a wilderness reserve in Suffolk with about 125 people getting together to plan for the next phase of growth for this year. So I'm feeling good. And it's Friday. How are you?
Yeah, Friday's always great, and the weather as we record today is glorious here in the northwest of the UK. So it always makes you happy, always makes me good, always makes me feel positive for the next few days at least.
Exactly.
So what happens in a wilderness retreat? Are you allowed to sleep first of all? Because that's one of the biggest things in my life where I'm just like, I need to just have a few days of sleeping.
I think the nice thing about working at Zoe is when you are in a science and nutrition company surrounded by people who care about health and wellness, there is some alcohol on a company retreat, but it's quite tame in that there's sleep, there's sauna, there's exercise, there's being outdoors, catching some sunshine, talking about the latest science, talking about where we're going. So, but most importantly, I think just spending time together, which is really rare in a remote first company, in my opinion, makes me feel really good about work and brings people together in a way that is really difficult when you have teams in San Francisco, Boston, London, and all over Europe. You know, we've got folks from Paris, Lisbon, Athens flying in. So it's just really good to have that time together to reconnect and recenter ourselves.
That's great, because I love working from home a lot, but I do miss that like human connection of just even knowing what kind of tea the person next to me takes. If I'm going to go to the kitchen, do I make a cup of tea for them? What is it that they have? And that's why a lot of these retreats are important, I guess, for the connection again.
Yes, exactly. I like a strong builder's tea. I discovered that as my first. I'm American, but my first ever boss in New York was a British woman from London. Yeah. And she asked me to make her a cup of tea. I brought it over to her. She sent it back. She grabbed my arm, walked me into the kitchen. She said, let me show you how to make a proper cup of builder's tea. So it's my first lesson in New York.
I love that. I make a podcast with a Twiggy former, supermodel from the 60s. It's called Tea with Twiggy, and she always asks her guests what cup of tea they're drinking right now. And it's always interesting the difference between the Americans and the British guests that they have. The Americans always we like coffee, maybe it's a gin, but the British always have like a really like focused, this isn't the tea I have, an Earl Grey or peppermint or whatever it is. So I'm fascinated that you as an American are on a builder's tea. That's not even something. If you said a builder's tea to people in America, they'd be like, "What are you talking about?"
They wouldn't know. Yeah. I think this is the nice thing about being a transplant somewhere is you get to discover and enjoy traditions. But I am a loyal PG Tips fan. I am also about to relocate to Dubai. Thankfully, there's Waitrose there, which means that PG Tips will be available. And I take it with oat milk. How do you take your tea?
My tea is it's an Earl Grey or Lady Grey, and it's just black, and the tea bag stays in there. Which a lot of people find offensive, but everyone's got their style. Everyone's got their style.
Yeah, everyone's unique.
That's it. My brother lives in California. When he comes over from the UK, he takes like 1,000 Yorkshire tea bags back with him. But we're not here talking about tea. We're here talking about you. Yeah. And so you come from the US. Can you tell me a bit about your history before you came to the UK? What were you doing? What brought you here in the first place?
Yeah, so I grew up in Massachusetts and studied design and psychology. I originally wanted to go into politics, and I spent
Oh, wow.
I spent a summer working in Washington D.C. at a policy reform think tank. It was riveting. As you can imagine, but I also realized that a lot of Washington D.C. is quite manipulative. So I thought I'd go into marketing instead. So I focused my degree around design and psychology, thinking if you can bring together two things, how do people feel when they look at certain signs and symbols, and how do you understand what motivates people? And that really led me to go into advertising. So when I moved to New York City, I was thinking, I want to work on big TV campaigns, but actually, it was in 2009 that I graduated, and so lots of companies were focusing around digital and building apps and really trying to meet customers where they were starting to be, which was on Facebook. So I, worked at an agency that was building up social campaigns and really thinking about Facebook groups when they were really taking off. And so built a lot of the ambassador and sort of influencer campaigns for brands like Coca-Cola and Diageo at a youth marketing agency that wound up getting bought by Digitas and bought by another big agency. So I wound up being through lots of transitions at this agency before I moved to London.
Well, I mean, what an exciting time to be part of digital marketing at the nascent early stages. And when I say digital marketing, the kind of paid part of that specifically, because no one really knew what was going on there. And the idea of giving this very new company money to then sell adverts on it was what? Sorry, why should we do this exactly? For a lot of people it was, but it sounds like the companies you were working with were like, well, we get it, let's just get on with it.
Yeah, and it was thinking about the platform in two different ways. So spending money on the advertising platform, but also thinking about organic social and thinking about micro influencers before that was even a word. So for example, with Coca-Cola, we were working with Coke Zero, and in the American South, you had lots of big campus fraternities and sororities that would host big parties, and they were highly influential on campus. Coke also saw a decline in sales of Coke Zero because people were starting to buy things like vitamin water or things that appeared to be healthier. And so we really put together a strategy to think about how do we hire people on campus who are part of these sororities and fraternities, have them be interns for Coca-Cola, run Facebook groups and run events. And we'd essentially give them Coca-Cola to have at their parties. When I think about it now, I think, oh my God, this is very manipulative. But, they were just being college students, and we were giving them early doors marketing experience in a way of making them sort of micro influencers to host events for us.
Well, so they weren't being paid at all. It was just free Coca-Cola.
No, they were being paid.
Coke Zero.
They were being paid.
Oh, okay.
They were being compensated fairly, but
sure.
And also getting free Coke to distribute at their parties. We were not in charge of the alcohol that was on campus. That I plead the fifth on.
I'm not going to delve deeper into that. But I love the idea of influencer marketing and the role of the micro-influencer. One of the biggest challenges with working with influencers is finding them in the first place, and then B, kind of validating that they have that influence in the first place. And the idea with the micro-influencers is that, you could try and connect with someone who's huge, Katy Perry, The Rock, Cristiano Ronaldo, for example, and they'll have millions of users. So it'll be easy, quote unquote, to find them. And if you have a big enough bank account, then you could obviously, hire their services. But then their engagement would be lower than if you got multiple influencers that got to the same level.
Yeah.
The engagement will be high for those multiple influencers, but then you have to deal with all these multiple influencers, which makes things way harder. So back then in 2009, when you didn't have the platforms that you can help to do that, what were you doing there? Was just literally spreadsheets and emailing out and checking how things were going? And what was that kind of process like?
Well, it was actually looking at where there was a high lift of Coke consumption. We saw that it was surrounding campuses. And if you think about at the very, when you start to think about, the University of Atlanta, Georgia, for example.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that's where Coke is made, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. In Hotlanta. And, you start to think about these influential parties on campus, right? Some of it is stereotypically around sports. It's around sororities and fraternities. It's around the people who hold the power and the influence. And so sometimes it's not the nerds like me. I was on the debate team. But it's really, I think, going back to basics and thinking about who is driving tastes and trends in any environment, right? I think the way that we think about influencers is to go on TikTok and find people. I think there's multiple different routes to finding your circles of influence. And when we think about campaigns, whether it's at Zoe or when I was at Flow or even Bloom and Wild, we'd always come up with a campaign concept, but we think about who's influential in talking about this thing. And it's not always just paying somebody who has millions of followers, as you say. It's about finding the people who can genuinely change people's opinions and influence that change, because, you know, you're dealing with inertia in marketing and you really want to try to get somebody to do something that they might not have done before. Or you're putting something like Coke into an environment where naturally it's consumed anyways. And so you're creating another surface for it to show up.
I love the idea, what you said there about people who can, because it obviously goes to the core of the term, people who can influence. And it made me think, I don't know why it made me think differently about the term then, where you said it, but how people can speak about something. It's not about how many people they have, but it's if they live, breathe, bleed the themes that you're talking about, that transmits really well. And if you can give them a platform or allow them to give them some kind of basis, then that might help spread their vision further, attract more people. So you're looking at the potential of people, aren't you?
Yes.
Rather than necessarily, okay, they've got X amount of followers, that means we can reach 50% of those followers.
We're looking at the potential of people, and specifically with a brand like Zoe, we're also looking at their credibility. And do they have if we think about moats from a branding perspective, I like to look at people who could be influential for us, whether it's spokespeople or ambassadors, and understanding what's their moat as a person. What are their credentials? Are they credible? Are they based in science, or are they based in, you know, social media, health halo? And could they be a credible partner for us? So yeah, it's do they have the right influence, but do they have the right credibility to speak to what you want them to speak about, right? And credibility, sometimes it matters. For Zoe, it matters a lot around who we work with. If you're a slightly different brand, like if you're selling razors online, you probably want somebody who has like the most beautiful legs or the most beautiful armpits, right? Like that's the kind of credibility you're looking for. And so the credibility will be different from brand to brand. But I think at Zoe, we're really looking for people who believe in science and believe in our ethos.
Sorry, my mind went to someone who's got beautiful armpits. I don't know what kind of brief that is, how you would judge that, but fine. With Zoe, I mean, at the moment, I'm very much thinking about what I eat, and that's brought my social feed to be full of lots of people who, a lot of people I think are like tinfoil hat wearers, and they're just like, don't eat that, eat that. And then someone else is like saying, don't eat that, eat that. And there's no kind of consistency, and a lot of people aren't based in maybe self-research and said, this is what's good for me, and therefore it's going to be good for everyone else. And you're kind of like, well, does that work exactly? I'm not sure. So with the way Zoe's built up, if you want to work with people, you want people who can think at least objectively, I would have thought. And how important is that science aspect to it? And for me, the science aspect is the ability to think outside of a box and think outside of something that you believe to be true, and be willing to kind of change your viewpoint if you see something to be more true than you thought it was.
Yeah, no, totally. I think at Zoe, what the challenge that we're up against is that social media has created this culture and world of extremes, right? So if you go on TikTok, someone will say, don't eat this pasta, eat this one. Don't follow this diet, follow this one. This is rubbish. This is the way forward. And so you really wind up with lots of very confused people. I think particularly in the US, and we see some of this in the UK as well, you then layer in repetition of packaging with nutrition labels that say this is healthy for the whole family. If you look at a box of Cocoa Puffs, it says this healthy for the whole family, nutritious way to start your day. And actually it's full of garbage, right? And I think when we look for partners to talk about Zoe on behalf of our brand, it's trying to find people who can look at the science, even if they're just running it through ChatGPT and asking for a summary to say, here's what the science says, here's what studies have shown, right? Which is the source of truth that we can trust. And actually, you know, there's lots of ways that we talk to our brand partners about what makes science credible and what makes it not very credible. You know, how big is the study, right? Does the study have any variables in it, or is it just looking at one product in isolation over a long period of time or a short period of time where they're asking for self-reported data, or is it just a simulation of a body part in a lab, right? We see a lot of that with a lot of gut health supplements. And so being able to at least be balanced is really important, but balance does not always lead to a really good hook. And we know hooks are important in social. So sometimes there are bits where we still need to play the game on how things become highly engaged in these social spaces without being too extreme and without playing into a lot of the fads that we see. And TikTok and Facebook, you know, no one's regulating medical advice or nutrition advice. And I think it's interesting that, like, even doctors who are on TikTok, their nutrition education tends to only be about a day in medical school. So, you know, whether or not it's a personal trainer or a nutritionist or a dietitian, those are two very different roles. Dietitians go to school for a lot longer. I didn't know that before starting at Zoe. And the dietitians would make sure that the distinction is very clear, that they went to school for much longer, and it's a much more difficult process to get that degree. And so yeah, it's tricky out there to know what's true and what's not. And so I think the way that we see ourselves at Zoe is, how do we create the tools for people to figure it out for themselves? Which is why, you know, our podcast tends to have really interesting debates and lots of opinions. But sometimes they're opinions on opposite sides of the table, where Tim or Jonathan from the Zoe team or Sarah Berry will talk about seed oils, for example, and somebody might say, actually, we've seen this. But at the end of the episode, we allow people to make decisions for themselves.
Yeah, I think you very much need to be able to make that decision for yourself. And I think that's important. And when I've seen some of these extreme influencers and they're saying, you have to be vegan, or no, you have to only eat meat, or you have to only do X. And I'm like, no, because that's not true. It can't be. It might be good for you personally, but I think you have to be able to bend slightly towards someone else's. You have to encourage people to think for themselves within maybe the context you're trying to share. And there's one influencer who, for example, I said to him, I put a comment on his post. I was like, what about people who are allergic to nuts? And he like shut me down. I was like, what are you talking about? You can't legislate for every single person. People are literally, if they eat nuts, they might die. And you're saying everyone should eat nuts. And I'm like, I don't understand where that comes from. But yeah, that's a slight digression.
It is tricky because actually the advice that is pretty universal tends to be the unsexy advice. Like, we don't get enough fiber. We're not eating enough vegetables. We're not moving our bodies enough. We're not sleeping enough. And those tend to be things where it's more difficult to cash in and make money, right? And so actually the things that tend to be free are the things that are healthiest for us and the least controversial.
Can you tell us a bit more about Zoe for people who don't know who you are?
Yeah, so Zoe is a science and nutrition company on a mission to improve the health of millions. So we started off by doing the world's largest nutrition study called Predict-1. So we looked at genetically identical twins, gave them the same diets, and looked at their biomarkers. So we looked at things like how they process fats, how they process sugar, and their gut microbiome to understand, like, much does genetics play a role in what we eat and what it does to our body. And actually we found that everyone's really unique. Even genetically identical twins have very different responses to food. If you and I were genetically identical twins and we both had oatmeal and banana for breakfast, you might have a very different response to it than I do. And I think why that's useful is because of the thing that we just talked about, right? Like, not everyone can follow a carnivore diet or a vegan diet or a Mediterranean diet and feel like that's the best thing for them. And so Zoe started to create tools. So we do personalized nutrition testing kits with a companion app, and you go through and you test your blood, your stool, and you wear a continuous glucose monitor on your arm, which tends to be this amazing aha moment for people because they can see what food's doing to their blood sugar straight away after they eat it. And really for many people who do it, and I tend to wear one from time to time anyways, just to see how food and my body are interacting, it creates this moment where people start understanding what's going on inside, right? We tend to eat for lots of reasons that aren't about hunger or nutrition. It might be emotional eating. It might be stress eating. It might be just eating for pleasure. And I think without the context of what's happening inside our body, we tend to forget that food plays an incredible role in how well we sleep, how well we perform, our sex life, our relationships, our cognitive health. And so Zoe really aims to create tools for people to understand their body better. And then last year we launched a 32 plant whole food supplement that you just add to meals, which gives you more fiber. In our research, we found that over the period of our study versus a control of a probiotic or a crouton, which you can put on top of a meal as well, which is a common thing that people put on top of meals. Both the crouton and the probiotic were less performant in terms of the impact on the microbiome. The crouton you'd expect, but you'd probably think that a probiotic has a greater impact on changing the microbiome fundamentally. But instead, the thing that changed it most was real plants being added to meals on a daily basis. And so, really the way that we think about ourselves at Zoe, like a lot of people ask me, like, what's your company's strategy? You've got tech, you've got physical product, you've got a podcast. The way that I think about it is like we're creating a new kind of system for care for people to make decisions about their nutrition, about making it easier to be healthier and to improve your gut health with our supplement. If you really want to do the gold standard of testing, you can do that. And then we've also just launched a free app in the United States, which allows people to scan barcodes in the supermarket and see how highly processed and what the risk is of that food before they put it in their basket. So, you walk into the supermarket, you've got 50 different kinds of bread. I don't know about you. I get paralyzed when I go shopping, right? And I don't know what the right decision is for me. So we've created a tool for people to understand, like, is Dave's killer bread or is this Ezekiel sprouted bread? Like, which one's better? Like, we know that Wonder Bread probably isn't the right decision, but when you get down to the 10 healthy brands, like, which one is the best one for me? So we have that as well. And then we have new products that are in development as we speak. And the way that we think about it is like, what are people's problems that they're struggling through on a day-to-day basis? Is it snacking? Is it emotional eating? Is it trying to navigate the supermarket? So we're really on a mission to help everyday people with those types of problems.
Yeah, I made a similar kind of tool. It's a Google Chrome extension where when I go into like Sainsbury's, it just pops up and says, these are the, and you pulls an AI info and it just says, these are the ultra processed ingredients in this, and then suggests other breads, for example, which might be more more palatable, not palatable, but have fewer ingredients. And that's really kind of just really simple. Okay, yeah, that's what that's got in it. Good. I might just check something else out. And it kind of just takes that thinking away from my head into like, so I don't have to worry about it. Like I say, that paralysis aspect is really confusing. And when you see the package, you just say healthy, healthier, the most healthy, you're like, well, which one is it?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, in different countries around the world, even on packaging, they will use the Nova score, which is the standard that's used in the industry today to understand how processed something is. And when we were on our Zoe retreat this week, Sarah Berry, our chief science officer, Professor Sarah Berry, I should say, our chief science officer, was showing, 3 different types of peanut butter on a slide. So Pippin Nuts, Sun Pats, and then Reese's peanut butter. And actually the Nova score for 2 of those is the same, but one is significantly worse, right? So what our science team has tried to do is create a new framework for customers to understand the nuance, or not customers, but everyday people to really understand, like, what's the nuance between one versus the other, and how do we create a more modern version of the Nova score for people to help understand what's right for them. I think the next stage is really us taking that and translating it into a metric that really matters for people. So is it inflammation? Is it, how their body feels? Is it some sort of measure of metabolic health that really resonates with people?
Because in making this tool, I did a lot of deep diving into Nova, and the outset seems quite straightforward. For people listening, there's a score. It's four categories of Nova. One is where it's no processed ingredients, where 4 is what the class is ultra processed. We're not going to deep dive into that now, but with like 4 categories, you think, okay, it'd be quite simple just to say, is it a 1 or is it a 4? But within that, there's so much kind of infighting, and it just becomes difficult to pull out these things. And then going back to bread, for example, bread is water, yeast, and flour in this purest form. But then also adding vitamin C or ascorbic acid is something that is very, very common and doesn't have any negative connotations to it. But some people might look at ascorbic acid, which is vitamin C, and think, no, I don't want it in my bread. But other people think, actually, that's a really nice fortified piece. I'm gonna buy that. And then that's just where it starts to become very complicated just for bread. And then expand that into lasagna.
Then it becomes pasta sheets and cereals and it becomes super complicated. And actually, I think sometimes in our advice, we tend to tell people to look out for certain things that they should have rather than what they shouldn't. I think there's lots of, like on social media, it's like, don't have this. This is terrible for your body. Whereas like in the bread equation, actually, the advice our scientists will give day in and day out is make your own sourdough bread. It's super high in fiber. It's fermented, and if you can't make it, then find a local bakery that's making really good whole grain sourdough, which our bodies, need certain whole grains. And that has a ton of fiber in it. And so, don't overdo it, but you can still enjoy the things that you like. And I think that's really important advice when we live in this world of, extreme sides where you shouldn't have this or you should only have celery juice. Like it's a bit wild, and I think it creates a disordered eating culture, right? It creates a lot of fear, or on the flip side, people just give up and say, do you know what, screw it, I'm just gonna eat whatever I want and it doesn't matter what it does to my health.
Well, I've done that. I've had I'm just gonna have 6 cherry bakewells right now because I can't I don't even want to think. One thing that does concern, we've gone down the nutrition side a bit with Zoe quite a lot here. It wasn't really the intention for this podcast. It was normally about marketing and stuff, but we'll get to that with the aha moments. But with one thing that concerns me about going down this route with nutrition is that it seems like with a lot of life, people who have the money and the ability to do some research will be the ones that benefit the most. So going to your local bakery is something that my wife and I have been doing a lot more recently, but I'm also very aware that the price of a loaf of bread there is like twice the price as it would be in the supermarket just down the road. And I feel I'd love it to be more egalitarian, to say everyone should be able to get something they can buy for the same price. Or even like the sourdough bread, like making it at home
takes time.
Sounds hard, isn't that hard? But also is like, I'm not going to do that. I've got no perception of how to do this, and it stops people doing that. So I'm definitely interested in what Zoe's doing, trying to help kind of refactor people who may feel that they are excluded because they haven't got the financial backing or the intelligence or experience to be able to do those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we've made our free app free. We've made it free in the US first.
Yeah.
It will come to the UK in due course, but I think the US is a much bigger market, much more problematic food market. Food deserts exist like properly. I was in Los Angeles. They do exist in the UK, but I think more so in the United States just because of how big the country is. I was in Los Angeles for a health food conference called Expo West in March. And I got to, so it's in Anaheim, California, which is also famously where Disneyland is. And I got to these apartments, like short stay apartments. And there's tons of families around going to Disneyland. There's also tons of people who are at this health food conference. And I go downstairs to what is called the grocery store in the short stay apartments. And I'm looking for eggs. I'm looking for some almonds. I'm looking for like a banana or an apple. I cannot find any of those things there. I can find mac and cheese. I can find
Wow.
Fruit Loops. I can find Pop-Tarts. I can find Starbucks grande coffee with vanilla syrup. But, even in California, in Los Angeles, next to the world's biggest health food conference, I'm sitting there thinking, how do parents go downstairs and just make their kids scrambled eggs? Something that's like actually pretty affordable. It's just like the food is not there, right? And I think that's driven by really big food companies monopolizing shelf space to get more ultra processed, long life food into these places. And it's the reason why we've made the app free in the US. It's the reason why we've made our podcasts free. We don't even put ads on it, because I think democratizing information in a world where TikTok has globalized the world a lot faster and has, as much as there's bad information on TikTok, I think there's actually a lot of really amazing information on TikTok. So how we bring that type of information and deliver it in a way that people actually want to watch, because I don't know if you've been to science conferences, I have with Zoe, scientists tend to not make this information very sexy. And I think that we're pretty unique at Zoe in that we've got amazing scientists who can communicate well, and a team of great marketeers who help them on that journey.
I love it. I want to talk to you forever, and I will catch up with you on a few points, but I want to go to the 3 questions, the aha moment questions. This podcast is called Aha Moments, after all. So the first question is, in a product or service that you've worked with, could be your agency background, could be Zoe, could be Flow. We didn't even get a chance to talk about Flow, man.
No, we'll talk about
what
Flow.
you guys did over the pandemic. With, honestly, in terms of data gathering. So I really want to I do want to talk about it because it was phenomenal. At the time of the pandemic starting, so much disinformation around what was happening with the virus, and Zoe, you guys took on the platform to say, we have a load of people who can just give us information, and then we can filter that information and send it back, more so than National Health Services in the UK, across the world. And when you guys did that, I was just I didn't even know who Zoe was at that time, but I was just this is exactly what we need. That, like I said, democratization of information, sharing it, and then the NHS started using information from Zoe, and things like the loss of smell. I think that came from you guys, people reporting symptoms in Zoe first. That to me is absolutely fucking mind blowing, right? And I still think about it every day. It's just astonishing.
It was wild, and people think that we were a non-profit that's turned into a commercial company, but actually, in 2019, when I joined Zoe from Bloom and Wild, our mission was to launch this nutrition product and actually launch it in the US first. And I remember I was at Heathrow. I was about to get on a plane to go to the US to film some testimonials for our early Zoe customers in California and Boston. And one of the founders phoned me up and he said, don't go. He's like, they're going to close the border and you're going to be stuck in the US without any healthcare. And COVID is going to be really big. So I came back to the office, and, this is when we were 30, 35 people in a tiny office in Waterloo. And the founders were very fired up about the fact that the government's not doing anything. And as incredibly bold founders do, they said, let's find a solution. Let's take our nutrition tracking software and let's build an app for COVID-19. And so we locked ourselves in the office over a weekend and essentially had a hackathon and built the COVID symptom study app. And on the Monday we launched it. I was on the phone to journalists, to Mike Butcher at TechCrunch, to all these people. We launched the app. After a week, we had about 2.5 million people logging their symptoms every day.
Wow.
And
wow.
if someone doesn't understand what product market fit is, we were shitting ourselves because that was product market fit. And then we said, oh my God, we have to keep maintaining this app and we have to come out with content. And actually, the most amazing thing about that experience was that we built something that allowed people to stay connected in a very strange way. We built something that gave people this feeling of being part of something greater. It was just with a simple question. And so we'll talk about this as well for Flow, is how do you feel today? right? So we
Yeah.
focused on the user. People are inherently wanting to talk about themselves. We collected all the symptom data. We published science around it that went all the way up to the World Health Organization. As you said, loss of taste and smell became one of the pivotal symptoms. People were sending us pictures of their skin rashes. So we created a database with the UK Dermatological Association for dermatologists to be able to understand which rashes looked like they were associated with COVID. And we were doing like really crappy webinars out of my like office in South London with all these amazing scientists who were looking at the data that people had opted into to share with us, completely anonymized. And you know, the BBC had asked for a pipeline for this information. The government initially said, no, we don't need your data. We're building our own app. Thank you very much. Eventually, before the Isle of Wight's, I guess, launch of their app, I got a phone call late at night from someone from Number 10 saying, about that data, do you think you could share something with us? And so, you know, we eventually did start working with the government to help them figure out, like, where is the virus spreading and how do we manage it? And how do we get the UK back what it once was? Obviously, we had a lot of like deaths and a lot of people are still experiencing long COVID. We still have people using the app today. But I think it comes back to this question that I talk about with any brand that I work with is people are inherently focused on themselves. So starting with, how do you feel, right? Tell me about you. And that was something that, that Flow does really well, you know, in thinking about people engage with brands that help them make progress. And I would say, as much as I am a brand person, people don't fall in love with your brand until you give them value and until you help them make some sort of progress in their own personal journey. And so whether it's a COVID app or whether it's Flow, where we're asking them how they feel today, right? Do you feel tired? Do you have a migraine? Do you have a high sex drive? Do you have a low sex drive? What's going to make progress in your relationship, in your life? And that's the thing that people care about moving the needle on.
Amazing. So with the first aha moment, you said you wanted to talk about Flow. Aha moments have you found with your customers or clients, and how do you get them to that point?
Yeah, so for those listening who aren't familiar with Flow, Flow is one of the world's biggest health apps. It's a period tracking app that is so much more than period tracking. And when I joined them a few years ago, one of the things we were looking at is Apple Health has period tracking. There's dozens of other period tracking apps out there. And, you know, you look at a lot of the big health brands like Apple Health, they're sort of nipping at our heels, even though we owned the market. I think the aha moment was really understanding, like, we could be the most accurate period tracker in the world, right? Down to the hour that your period's coming, right? And that matters a lot for women, because you don't want to be giving a presentation and then your period comes and you're wearing white trousers, which, like, this has happened to so many women, right? Like, it's the worst. Sure. It's the absolute worst. And then it doesn't matter how smart or how great you are, you feel stupid, right? And so it didn't actually matter how accurate our period tracking was. The thing that women were really looking for is something that took that period data, which, you know, 360 million women globally use Flow. And they're giving us their data every single month, telling us how they're feeling, what symptoms they're having. We know the start and end date of their period. That's really useful. But how you actually take that data and use it to empower women to live a better life outside of just knowing the start and end date of their period is super powerful. And so when I joined the business, we were thinking about monetization. We were thinking about value, right? Like, you can talk about monetization in an app, you can talk about onboarding in an app, but really the fundamental question with any business is, how do you deliver value? And that's where you can create commercial value. And that's what drives the company's valuation, right? How much value delivery are you giving? So we spoke to women in the US and we had really deep conversations with them. And I would say one of the biggest mistakes I see companies make, whether it's in their UX research teams or their insights team or their marketing insights team, is they just do surveys or they do automated, you know, some sort of insight capture where you're not actually talking to humans. Like, we are talking less and less to humans, right? We're going onto ChatGPT saying, take this survey data, tell me the jobs to be done that these users have, and like hoping for the best. And actually the thing that we did really well is we had high EQ conversations about struggles that American women were having in their lives. One of them was perimenopause. All the symptoms around that, super complicated, very under-researched. The second one was sex life. You know, we found that the majority of women really hated their sex life, and they also didn't understand their sex drive. So there's two forces, right? Like, their partner's pulling them to have more intimacy, but they also don't understand how their body works around their own sex drive and what factors play a role in being really horny or not being horny. And actually period data, cycle data, and symptom data could give us a really great picture around that. And so by having conversations and talking to real people, the business had its own aha moment that actually we needed to start talking about things that were taboo. We needed to start thinking about how do we empower users with our data, not just give them the logic brain. Let's give them better tracking, right? Let's give them more accurate tracking, which was the hypothesis in the company. Like, let's talk about our accuracy. Actually, accuracy means nothing when you have to bring people on an emotional journey with a brand to really help them make progress somehow. So for us, it was really leaning into lust. It was leaning into human connection. And that is so much more powerful than just leaning into something that's very, very much based in logic. And so, you know, I think if you're a founder listening to this, or you're a marketing director listening to this, like, don't be afraid to have conversations with real people and ask them hard questions. Don't ask them leading questions. Ask them hard questions around where are they struggling? Like, what sucks in their life? What's great in their life? And ask the whys around, you know, how do they feel? How does it impact their day-to-day? How does it impact their relationships? I think a lot of people refrain from asking these questions because they might feel inappropriate. I think as an American in the UK, I never feel like it's inappropriate to ask these questions. So that's my unfair advantage. But I think doing the deep dive is super important to understand, like, what do people care about? Because fundamentally, founders tend to care about their own ideas.
I love it. That's so much to unpack and take away. I do have to go to the next question, though, which is for yourself, a product or service that you found, an aha moment you've had in a product or service that you buy into, and what was it?
So I actually like tried Zoe before I joined, and so, like, for me, that was a bit of an aha moment. I think I'd never really been happy with my weight or with my fitness level. I always felt tired. I always felt hungry. And by going through Zoe and actually starting to like look at some of the real-time data that I got through the program, I had all these unlocks of, well, shit, I'm like eating food that's not great for me. And so it really overhauled my diet. And then once I felt comfortable with my diet and lost a little bit of weight, I felt comfortable enough to then go exercise. Because, you know, people tend to do this thing where like they get ready to go to the gym. Like, before you get a personal trainer, you have to train enough so that you don't feel stupid with a PT. But I would say, that was definitely one of them.
That might lead into, the last question is about personal aha moments or life hacks. Is there anything that you'd like to share with the people listening?
Yeah, I think make yourself really uncomfortable at least once a year.
Explain.
At
least once a year. Okay.
Do really uncomfortable things. I think as humans, we tend to do the things that feel comfortable and feel safe. I think the only way that you can have growth is through doing things that are difficult and uncomfortable. When I moved to the UK, I did not know one soul. It was difficult and it was uncomfortable. It was one of the best decisions I've ever made. I'm about to move country again, and to a country I have never been to in my entire life. And I am terrified, but it's going to really help me grow. And so, you know, taking this role on at Zoe, shifting from a marketing role into a much more commercial role, for me was really scary, but I have learned so much. And I think we often forget how much we can adapt and how much we do know when we go into, maybe it's a different role at work, maybe it's a new relationship. But I think like having really hard conversations and setting expectations tends to be really useful. And I'll give you an example. And I think this can be part of the aha moment. So I recently got engaged, and I've been married before. Thank you. Been married before. So I've gone through the hard thing of going through a divorce. I never thought I'd get engaged again. And the person who I'm with sent me this book a few months ago called Couples That Work. And it's about dual career couples. It's written by a Harvard Business School professor. And one of the exercises in the book is where you sit down separately and you write your values, your boundaries, and your fears. And doing that exercise on your own is really scary. I'd recommend that anyone does it, whether you're partnered or not. I think it's actually also a really useful exercise to do with your boss or with somebody that you're managing, or if you want to manage up, doing it with your manager. But we separately did that exercise where we listed out what the things that we value in life, the things that we're absolutely terrified of, and then like the things that are hard no's for us as a couple or as an individual, sorry. And then we came together and we looked at each other's values, fears, and boundaries, and we talked through that over the course of probably 3 days. We were in Paris for a long weekend, and we just walked to the city and we talked about all of those individual things. And what that helped us do is understand the why, right? Because I think a lot of people, whether it's at work or at home, talk about these values, fears, and boundaries, but don't talk about what's driving that. And I think like, whether it's my flow example or my Zoe example, like all of this is about understanding what motivates someone and what makes them tick, and what's really like driving the decisions they make on a day-to-day basis. So I think like for me, that exercise was an aha moment that I think is incredibly valuable. We did it 3 months ago because we're about to move country together because he's starting a new job. We're doing it again because we have a whole new set of fears and boundaries and things that we need to talk about, what we value and what we don't value in the inflection point in our lives now. So I think like that, it's a great book. It's called Couples That Work. Doing that exercise, I think, is super important, whether you're partnered or whether you're in a friendship that's really meaningful or a relationship with your boss.
I'm excited for you. And I went through something. I left UK and lived in Norway for 3 years.
Oh, wow.
A lot of people there were like, why are you doing this? I was like, what do you mean? Yeah. But I needed to have a change in my career at the time, still for the same industry, but moved to Norway. So one tip I'd give to you, and I've got friends who live in Dubai now, and there's a slight distinction between the guys the guys are there. I'd say learn some Arabic. You don't need to be obviously fluent in it, but just try and get involved in the language a bit and just be ingrained a bit more and not be like the typical expat. One of my friends who's from the northeast of the UK and he's coming back and speaking Arabic to him, and like, dude, that's just amazing. I find that kind of just to be absorbed in the local culture, I think is really would be helpful. Like I said, it doesn't have too much, but I think people appreciate it, and you get to feel the culture a bit more.
Yeah, that's amazing advice. And I think it's so important. I think like moving, whether it's like you moving to Norway or me moving to Dubai, like I see travel and changing where you are in the world as a way to expand how you see the world and how you understand people, right? I think my friends who are extremely well-traveled have a very different view and way that they empathize with other humans rather than, I have some of my family and friends who've never left the US. And I think that having that appreciation for how other people live and people's religions, people's beliefs is incredibly powerful in uniting the world rather than hatred across the world. So yes, I will learn some Arabic. I will report back. I'll immerse myself in the culture because I think it's 90% expats in Dubai. So I think it will be an interesting experience, but I'm probably one of the rare people. I'm not moving driven by tax, but my partner is starting a job working for a payments business in Dubai that's sort of going up against MasterCard and Visa. So it'll be an exciting time for him. So thinking about how I support him through that journey is going to be a conversation we need to have.
Awesome. So are you happy for people to contact you via LinkedIn?
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. So I'll leave the details in the show notes to your LinkedIn account if they want to contact you and connect and ask you questions about how's your Arabic going on, for example.
Amazing.
Thank you so much for joining me. It's been great chatting. This is the longest we chatted directly, so I've really enjoyed this, and I could carry on talking for at least another 3 hours longer. So I hope we get to chat before you head to Dubai or when you get there.
Yeah, no, I'd love to do that, and I know we haven't caught us up as much as we'd all like, and I think it's been great chatting, and I hope we haven't talked about marketing very much actually, but hopefully some food for thought on nutrition and periods.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for joining me on this episode of Aha Moments podcast, and thank you so much, you guys, for listening and watching this episode and sharing it with as many people as possible. That's right. I'm going to ask you to share it with people. Share the link, write reviews, leave comments if you're watching on YouTube, leave comments if you're watching on Spotify, because it really helps. Sarah's happy for you to get in contact with her. All the details to get in contact with her on LinkedIn are in the show notes or in the comment section in the description on YouTube if you're seeing this. And if you want to watch another episode or hear more about me, click on the button. It might be this side or it might be this side, but click on the link in the show notes to find out more about what I'm doing and other episodes that you can listen to or watch. Thank you very much, guys. It's been a pleasure, and I'll see you next time.